You're listening to a message entitled Worship, Who is God? By Jim Eschenbacher, pastor of the branch, from March 15th, 2015. For more sermons, please visit us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel, The Branch, Oregon.
We cannot and should not attempt to walk with God without an understanding of this message. So I want to get right into it, and I want to pave the way for it. I've decided, last week I was praying at the beginning of the week, and the Lord gave me the word worship, and I thought, well, I wrote a book that included that. And He said, no, I want you to preach it. It's a critical word. How many of you can get in a conversation about God and not ever mention worship? It's like it's just part of the whole relationship that we have with God. In fact, it's crucial to that relationship. Jesus said to Satan, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and Him only shalt thou serve." Now that word serve is interpreted worship in other places in the New Testament, the Greek word. So Him only shall you worship. We worship God. I just gave away my first point. I'm going to preach this message in 5 subcategories: who, where, when, why, and what. Who do we worship? Why, where, and when? What is worship? Tonight, maybe tonight, see how long I go. Today, I feel the most important and most critical part of this message is to answer the question, whom, not who, but whom do we worship? Now you're going to say, duh, Jim, it's God. That was a short message. But let me ask you a second question. Who is God? And you're thinking, duh, Jim, everybody knows who God is. No, everybody doesn't know who God is. And that's what I want to talk about today. Who is God? This God that we worship, this being, person that we trust our lives to, that we do silly things for. I mean, who wants to get up early on Sunday morning and go to a building and sit and listen to some guy like me ramble? We do these things because we believe and trust and worship God. Who is this God? I want to work on an answer to that question today. But before I answer the question, who is God, we're going to let the Bible do that for us. I want to answer a few questions. Who God is not. What's the first commandment of the 10 Commandments? Can you just kind of semi-quote it? Jeremy? Oh, did you look it up? Are you cheating? Thou shalt have no other gods before me, or thou shalt have no other gods but me. That's the first commandment. God put that at the top of His list. What was He thinking about? Were there other gods that He was addressing? Is Zeus a real god? Does he control the lightning and the thunder? And is he the god of the skies? Is Venus the goddess of whatever? I don't even know what she is. Or all these different ones? Are they really truly gods? Or did God see forward to a time when humans would make a god of almost anything? Something to worship, something to give their life to, something to devote their time and their hearts to. That's, I think, what God was looking forward to, because it's happened. How many of you, in your younger days, when you were youth, studied or knew about the mystical or mythical gods that are out there? Like I mentioned, Zeus. Jeremy did. Anybody else remember those days? Anybody else remember being young? That's the hardest part for me. I remember hearing about these guys. Well, all those gods were created in a lot of Greek folklore, a lot of Greek writings, a lot of mystical writings about why things are the way they are. People who did not know the true God came up with all these gods. And the Jewish people had to deal with that when they were running button heads with the Jewish people. Okay, you have gods that we don't know about. You have gods that we don't believe in. We only believe in one true God. And they all believed in these different mystical gods. So there's the gods of mysticism. Anybody here think you might be caught up in serving or loving a god of mysticism, a god of mystical creation or mythical creation? Here's another one. Trent talked about it last week, and I'm going to bring it up. It's the god of legalism. Do you know that can be a god? Trent taught from Galatians last week, and one of the things that Paul was doing to the Galatians was he was saying to them, you know what? When I preach the gospel to you, that gospel set you free from your legal responses to doing the right things in order to make God like you. God set you free from that. And so along came these Judaizers, they were just people who were raised in traditional Judaism where they had to do a lot of things in order to be pleasing to God. And they were trying to teach that stuff to the church that Paul had birthed in Galatia. So Paul says, no, don't listen to them. In fact, he said, even if an angel from heaven tells you a gospel other than the gospel that I have given you, let him be accursed. Paul's not messing around here. He's saying, this is the real deal here. Don't do this. Did you know that people make God, small g God, of the law and legal responses to the law? Those people, if you want to include yourself in it, or if you've been there before like I have, tend to be judgmental because there's this law on the wall and everybody is supposed to measure up to that law on the wall or wherever it is. And we all try, and you and I, being super spiritual, might actually do 3 of them right. And we'll always point to those 3. How are you guys doing on this one, and this one, and this one? You know, I don't gamble, so it's easy for me to say, how are you guys doing on gambling? Because I'm a conqueror. And hi, Randy. Hi, Lindy. Welcome back. I just saw a couple of heads that were in Hawaii last week. How many of you have an area of where you are very obedient to the Lord? Maybe it has to do with swearing. You just don't swear at all anymore. I quit a long time ago, but the quitting process was stop saying it out loud and just think it. And then eventually I realized I'm reading the Sermon on the Mount and I'm going, oh, if I think this, I've already said it, I might as well say it. Saying some of those words that many years later, 10 years later, it's too hard for me. So I thought, I got to quit thinking in swear terms. All these things, you know, that we try to conquer and get a handle on. If you fought the sexual addiction thing, if you've fought that in your life and you've had some kind of victory, you hold on to that victory and you're a champion, actually, if you've managed to step out of that temptation, because that's a mean temptation. But anyway, I just want to say that that's how legalism becomes your God. And then you become judgmental underneath that God. Now, this is tricky because we're talking about God. He sent the law, but it's still not God. The law is not fully God. God is bigger than his law. Jesus, who was God, said, I came to fulfill the law. Took care of it. In fact, there's a verse in Galatians. What is it? Chapter 4, verse 24. Where is it, Trent? And he says, we were under the law until Christ. The law was like a schoolmaster, like a teacher, to keep us. I'm looking for him. Actually, I'm looking for my glasses. I have a button on this pocket. That's weird. Okay. Hang on, I'm almost there. Except I don't know what page I'm on. Huh? Oh, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Oh, wow, look at that. I don't even need my glasses now. Is that what you're trying to tell me, Gretch? Galatians 3:24 goes like this. The law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. The law kept us from falling over into deep, deep evil and sin until Christ came. And then Christ fulfilled the law, so now we don't respond to the law, we respond to Christ. I have chosen in my life to try to keep the law to show my love for Christ. Not because I want to prove anything to Him or show God that I'm real sincere. I really, really would like to keep the law as a way of showing how much I love the Lord. That's really my whole thing. So it all stems from love now, and not stems from obligation or obedience. You get the difference? Anyway, here's another one. This one is possibly the biggest of all. Do you know what humanism is? I'll tell you my definition because I'm sure it's wrong. I'm sure it's not complete, I didn't mean wrong. The humanism is the placement of the human at the top of the food chain, even above God. We consider ourselves the prize of all creation. And modern day existentialism, which is another long word, I love long words, is that I not only am, each one of us is above everything else. We have a right to make our decisions however we want to make them. That's the final stage of humanism. That's the culture that we are currently embroiled in, or living in, whichever the case may be, is that each one of you has a right to make your decisions based on what you think is right. There's no creed, there's no code of conduct, there's no law of God, there's nothing. It's all in your heart and your mind. That's the final extension or the final phase of humanism. We have a tendency to drift into that quite easily. Now let me show you how this impacts Christianity, because as Christians you say, I would never do that. Let me show you how this impacts Christianity. We don't worship God, we worship an attribute of God. We choose to worship an attribute of God, and generally it's an attribute that serves our purposes quite well. I worship God the healer because He healed me, or because He's going to heal my mom, or because He's healing people. I worship God the provider because Lord knows I need to be provided for. Who's at the head of that? Me. I'm saying, Lord, I worship God because He does this for me. He's my servant. That is a false god. And that is not the picture of God that we want to create this morning, that I want to create this morning. I want to read some scripture to show you how humanism is described in the Bible. Romans chapter 1, if you want to turn there. Let's see if I can read it without my glasses. See if I can find it without my glasses. Romans is right after Countrymen, right? Stupid joke, sorry. Romans 1, starting in I'll start in verse 18. It's not working. I'm going to put my glasses on, thank you. Sorry, guys. Light did help. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Isn't that interesting? We don't just deny or belittle or throw away the truth. We just suppress it. We don't let it have freedom in our lives. We don't let it have the place it's supposed to have. Or we don't let it have the freedom that it's supposed to have in other people's lives. We suppress the truth. That's why Paul said, don't allow any other gospel to be preached, ever, because you're suppressing the truth. That's the reason right here. He goes on. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And here's the critical verse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, and animals, and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. And here's the key. Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is the biblical description of humanism. That is the biblical description of existentialism. Now, existentialism is a word I didn't explain to you. I don't know that I can because it's bigger than I can probably explain. But it was already in existence before Jesus came. It was already in seed form. And it has grown and grown and grown until you're aware of it now. Existentialism and narcissism are rampant in our midst. Anyway, all of that is because instead of honoring God as God, they exchanged that for honoring their creature, which is you and me, more than the Creator. I'm talking about what we're not to do. Now, we're still on this theme of becoming humanistic. For this reason, verse 26, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty of their error. Now, this sermon and this portion of the sermon is not about homosexuality, but I would like to say that that addresses it quite clearly, don't you think? It's not part of God's plan. It's part of the plan that happened when man disregarded God. And this started so many years ago. So I'm not going to belabor this point, but you read it yourself and come up. Allow God to teach you if you need that. Verse 28. The list goes on, and this is what I really want to focus on. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. Okay? They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. Okay, that's a good enough list, but he goes on. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. That's good. Nope, he goes on. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents. That's the end of a verse, but I have a comma, so we go on. Foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Holy mackerel. They know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. They not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. Wow. When you spend $8 or $9 on an R-rated movie, you're approving a lot of activities that he says don't bother with you. Now, I'm not into preaching the holiness of never going to movies. I am into preaching that, but I'm not going to preach that because I see how we get off just chasing, doing the right things. But can you see what has happened as man has worshipped himself rather than God? And how that's a spiral down. It's not just a mistake. It's the beginning of a downward spiral. Did you know when I was a kid, I went to work, well, I was 19 actually, I went to work for a grocery store, and we could not sell liquor on Sundays. Who made that rule? Well, that was made clear back in the Prohibition and following the Prohibition. People were trying their best to live a holy life, and they found that liquor was an interruption to holy life sometimes, for some people especially. So they just wouldn't sell it. Stores couldn't sell it. Well then, while I was still working there, they changed the rules. And we could sell it after 2 o'clock. I guess they were allowing churches to get out so that people from church could run there and buy booze. But anyway, by the time, I quit then a year or two later, and then shortly after that, they just threw the prohibition away altogether, and you can buy booze all day long on Sunday. That's just one example. Another example is the movies. At one time, when the rating system, the GPGR 13 in there somewhere, X thing was installed, families were very careful about that. Very careful. Then television decided, you know what? This is stupid. We need people watching our shows. Let's show R-rated movies on television. So they started showing R-rated movies on television, and our kids are sitting there with us, and on comes an R-rated scene. It's like, oh, that sucks. And you throw the kids out of the room, and you finish watching it. And then next time, one of the kids says, Mom, Dad, I've seen it over at so-and-so's house. So we don't quit. We don't stop anymore. Do you see how this whole thing has spiraled down? That is not the doing of our Lord. That is not the God that we want to worship. That is not the God whom we serve. That is the evil one who planted a seed so long ago, which we know of now as existentialism. All it was you can be like God. What did Satan say to Eve? He said, if you will disobey God and eat that fruit, you'll be like him. Are you kidding me? So disobedience, Satan has taught us, disobedience will give you authority, will give you the power to decide what's right and wrong. That's what he told Eve. If you disobey here, you're going to know what's right and wrong. It worked. It didn't fix anything, but it worked. In your heart and life, disobedience leads you to the place where you make your own decisions. You don't respond to God anymore. If you disobey God, then you just have to decide on your own. I think this is okay for me. This is not okay for him. This is not okay for her. This is not okay for me. You're the one making those decisions because you have spiraled out of relationship with God where he's the one who says, this is how I want you to live. All right. All I've talked about so far is who God is not. He's not limited by any of his attributes. There's a statement in my notes. I'm not even looking at my notes today. This is crazy, but I want to read a statement that I wrote in here, if I can find it. Is that on the ear? No, it's not. No wonder I can't see. I don't even know if it's in your notes. Let me see if I can find it. Sorry, I'm acting crazy because I sort of am. I don't know. I can't find it. Sorry about that. Oh, God is greater than all and any of his actions and attributes. He's greater than all and any of his actions and attributes. So you can't pick and choose. It's not a fruit tree where you go, I think I like this one, Lord. Don't like that one. God is God. That's who you worship. You don't worship the God that you like, the one that makes you feel good in the middle of the day. You like God who is God. Now, how are we going to find out who God is? Where's that? Well, it's all through the Bible, but I'm not going to read the whole Bible to you this morning. It reminds me of this joke, but I'm not going to tell it. It's cute, but it's a waste of time. We're going to read from Job chapter 38. So you can turn there while I'm introducing Job. Do you remember the story of Job? Most of you know him as the one who suffered and went through all kinds of gross stuff and then eventually was okay. But God restored to him what he had lost. But in the very first verse of Job, we are told that Job was a righteous man. Now the kids are learning about righteousness today. Job was a righteous man. How many of you would like to have God say that about you? God spoke that in heaven. He said, have you considered my righteous servant Job, my servant righteous Job, whatever it's worded. And Satan blamed God. He says, I can't get to him. You've got him surrounded. And God goes, he's yours. You can't take his life. This is two separate meetings here, but Satan took away everything Job had, including his family, except for his wife. She just took herself away. And then Job was covered with boils from head to toe. He grabbed a sharp stone and scraped his skin, and that felt good. You can imagine he was in a little bit of pain. The guy was having some trouble. Well, then his three quote-unquote friends showed up, and they're going to comfort him. Well, one of the beliefs in those days was if calamity came upon you, it was because of sin in your life. So, trusting that belief system, they probed Job, what'd you do? What's going on? And for like 36 or 35 chapters, he talks back and forth with them. They do their accusations. He responds and says, no, God kept saying, God is good. God is the God of these things. It's happened, but God is God. Now, God shows up on the scene. And God calls Job to task. You might think he's being very mean to Job and maybe telling him that he was totally wrong, except for there's a verse in chapter 42 that says, verse 7 of chapter 42, the last chapter of the Bible, to Job's friend, God said, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." So he's admitting there that Job spoke properly of him. If Job had any mistake in what he was saying, it was that he was trying to describe God according to human knowledge, and he couldn't do it. Let me read a little bit from this chapter 38. It's breathtaking. We're trying to find out today who is God, so why not go to the source? Here's what he says about himself. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. First of all, let me make note of that. How do you create an image or a statue of a whirlwind? Very hard to do. Whirlwinds are moving. You could create a video of a whirlwind, but a statue of a whirlwind would be hard to do. So God chose to speak from some physical manifestation that we could not immortalize. He spoke out of a whirlwind. So you're not going to build a tent for this one. And he said to Job, "Who is this that that darkens the counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me." Man, what a tough day that is. "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb?" I want to say early here that in this description, God uses words that Job could relate to, like womb, doors, father. You'll hear that one in a little bit. Storehouse. These are not necessarily words that perfectly describe what God is talking about, but he's giving Job something to relate to. Since you think you understand me according to your level of knowledge, what do you think of this? And he goes on. "Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed." Did Job have anything to do with that? That's what he's being asked. "Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it?" That's an interesting phrase. But do you know that darkness is the cover for sin? A lot of times Jesus said men love darkness because... How am I misquoting that, Randy? Because of sin. Men love darkness because their deeds are evil. Yeah. So we like, thank you, to do... If we're going to sin, a lot of times we look for darkness. We don't want to be seen. We don't really want to... If we know for sure this is what we're doing, we're disobeying God, we don't want to be seen. So when the dawn comes, it's like he shakes out this black blanket and the sin falls away. It's a pretty interesting picture. And again, God is saying, this is who I am now. I don't know who you're talking about. Verse 14, "It is changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth?" Nowadays, the scientists would say, well, yes, we have. He's talking to Job here, and he's talking to you and me. "Declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? Where is the place of darkness? That you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great." Now that verse shows that God is using some sarcasm here, some irony, and He's okay with it. Now I'm not saying that we're supposed to be sarcastic with one another, but if you're listening to God, He doesn't always just say, that's right, that's wrong. Sometimes He says, you seriously think you can do this? You? Who are you anyway? In your whole life you haven't been able to make the dawn happen at a different time, and you're going to tell me who I am? God who created the dawn? Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? There's a fun one. Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, to make the ground sprout with grass? Has rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And all the women go, ooh, not mine. And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. The ice caps. Can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? These are about the stars. Can you lead forth Mazzaroth, how do you say that, in their season? Or can you guide the bear with its children? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings, that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens? When the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick fast together, can you hunt the prey for the lion? Or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? When they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their thicket? Who provides for the raven its prey, when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for lack of food? Did you ever think that when a young bird is squawking from a nest, God hears that? Have you ever thought about that? Man, Job didn't know, probably, and I don't know. But do you know when the mountain goats give birth, starting in chapter 39? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch and bring forth their offspring and are delivered of their young ones become strong and they grow up in the open. They go out and do not return. Who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I have given the arid plain for his home and the salt land for his dwelling. He scorns the tumult of the city. Here's a funny verse. He hears not the shouts of the driver. No road rage. He doesn't like road rage. Except that this was written way before cars. So there's several different theories on what that word means, but I'm not going to give them to you. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes? Or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you depend on him because his strength is great? And will you leave to him your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are they the pinions and plumage of love? For she leaves her eggs to the earth, and she lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them, and that the wild beast may trample them. She deals cruelly with her young, as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear, because God has made her forget wisdom, and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses to flee, she laughs at the horse and rider. Ostriches are really fast, by the way. Do you give the horse his might? Still talking to Job, still talking to you and me. Do you do any of these things? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows up the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, Aha! He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Man, I read that this week and I thought, I've never really paid attention to that before, but all those movies where their battles involve horses don't ever seem hesitant to go into the battle. I never really noticed that until I read this. I thought, wow, it's a trait of the horse. It's something God has given, something God has done. Is it your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? On the rock he dwells and makes his home on the rocky crag and stronghold. From there he spies out the prey. His eyes behold it from far away. His young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is. And the Lord said to Job, Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Okay, here's Job's first response. Behold, verse 4 of chapter 40, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no farther. Then the Lord answered Job again out of the whirlwind and said, Dress for action, like a man. You're a big man, right? I will question you, and you make it known to me. Answer me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? How about that as a creed for not serving God? Will you condemn me so that you can be in the right? And how about that as another indication of humanism where we are above all things? Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like His? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them all in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then will I also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you. Now I could stop there, and I planned on stopping there, but I'll read just a little bit more because this gets into some real interesting stuff. And we're talking about the fact that God is above anything you or I can imagine. We've talked about weather, we've talked about climate, if you will, we've talked about animals, talked about the stars, the heavens. And in all of this, He claims to know, God claims to know, not wrongly, He claims rightly to know everything about everything. And He's challenging Job, so what do you know about this? And He's challenging you and me. Job is a representative of all of us. We are all caught up in life without God. He comes to us and says, what do you know about life? And we think we have answers. Well, I took some classes on it. And I took a science class once. And I took this class once. And so I know stuff, God. And He goes, really? Let's talk about that. And listen to this list that He's going into. And now He's going to talk about, starting in verse 15, Behold behemoth. Everybody knows what behemoth is. It's a really large, anything really large is called a behemoth. Well, here's where that comes from. Which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscle of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar, and the sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade the lotus trees cover him. The willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? The commentators, especially the liberal commentators, have decided that this is talking about a hippopotamus. Are you kidding me? Have you ever seen the tail of a hippopotamus? A little spindly thing that twirls around when he... Anyway, this is talking about the tail becoming like a cedar tree. This is a really good description of dinosaurs, by the way. So, do your own studies and your own math. I'm obviously telling you what I believe. Dinosaurs were part of our existence, but they were not millions of years ago. They were somewhere in the 6,000-year history. Probably they didn't survive after the flood. Many of them were buried in the flood. We know that from the fossil records. But possibly they didn't survive after the flood. So did they not make it onto the ark? That would be a question to ask God. Because I don't know the answer. So, maybe there wasn't room. Maybe the door wasn't big enough. No, you didn't put a big enough door. Chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Now we're talking about something else now. We did the behemoth, now we're doing Leviathan. Or press down his tongue with a cord. Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of a man is false. He is laid even low at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? Who has first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs. This is back to Leviathan. Or his mighty strength, or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Or who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. In his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him and immovable. His heart is hard as a stone, hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does no avail, nor the spear, nor the dart, nor the javelin. He counts iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep broil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him, he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. On the earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. What is this thing, this Leviathan, this seemingly animal that lives in the sea? There's a lot of folklore about him, the Loch Ness Monster and various other things. And he breathes forth fire. Do you notice the detail that God goes into here? And this is talking about something that possibly wasn't even around when Job was alive. We don't know. There are other verses about Leviathan, but they're really hard to interpret, and so I'm just going to leave it alone. The liberal theologians, and I keep saying liberal, I say that just carefully because they want to make everything fit into their thought processes. They call this an alligator. Really? Sounds pretty awesome to me, and I've never seen an alligator breathe fire. So at some point, this is God describing something that He knows about, that He has created. And there are other theologians who think that it has nothing on earth, that it's something heavenly, that it's a spiritual power. I don't know. Could be both, could be either. I did not receive some sort of evidence about the interpretation there, so I'm not going to give you any. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's in the Bible, and God says, I know about this. In fact, I know every detail about this. Job, Jeremy, what do you know? Mike, what do you know? Michael, what do you know? Wanda, what do you know? This is God talking. So then, he says, Job answered him. As you can tell, I'm getting near the end. There's not a whole lot left. I know that you can do all these things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. Does that sound familiar? Things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now let me ask you. Same question as we started with. Who is God? Who do you worship? Is He that big? Or have you made Him some extension of your imagination? Some extension of your desire? Some extension of your greed? Some hope that He is really close to you? This is the God we serve. And this is the mightiness and the power and the authority of the God we give ourselves to. You never have to be ashamed giving your life to God. Are you kidding me? You're saying, I give my life, I put the focus of all my attention on the one being, the one power, the one source of all things who has all authority. That's what I'm doing. You don't have to apologize for that. You don't have to say, yeah, I know a wave swept over some people in Japan. I know that. That was a bad day. You don't have to say anything. For God is in charge and overall everything. That's who we get to serve. Don't make Him fit your worldview. Let Him be in His worldview, and you adjust accordingly. I'm going to close with one last verse. I went too long. Oh well. 1 Chronicles 16, 25 to 27. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. This is David speaking. And He is to be held in awe above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and joy are in His place. The question I asked in the beginning is, whom do we worship? Did this story from Job give you a little bit more of a picture of whom we worship? Who God is? We somehow think we can motivate or cause Him to do something we want Him to do. This, to me, makes me where I don't even know how to put words to the thoughts that I'm having about God right now. Are there words? Words are mine, so they're not complete. Carl's going to share a song this morning. Are you up there? Yeah. In the beginning, to start off with, that just struck her this week, and she didn't even know the sermon yet. And it just paints the same picture. God, I wish I could commune with you. I don't know how. This is the God we worship. The next sermon we'll talk about either what is worship or why we worship. I don't know yet.